Hello everyone, welcome back again to Angela's Craft Room. Today I've got this beautiful card for you using the Magical Mermaid stamp set from Stamping Up. Now today, in the video today, I just want to show you how I coloured the mermaid, and then I'll come back and we'll complete the card because the mermaid needs to be left dry overnight before applying her to the card. So in this video I'm going to show you how I actually coloured the mermaid with Stamping Up Blends alcohol markers. So to start with, I have stamped the mermaid and cut her out. I've stamped her in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I'm going to be using, for her hair, I'm going to be using Calypso Coral. So we'll do that first. So I'm going to use the light one, and I'm using the nib end, not the brush end, the nib end to start with. So I'm just applying, and I always go in the direction that the artist has put the line. So this is just the light Calypso Coral, and I'm just applying very carefully to the edges and then just flicking it down because it's such a small area. Okay. And then I would just bring in on the nib end as well, where the artist has put those lines. I'm just going to just do a bit of a flick motion and then come back in with the light on the nib end again and just blend it a little bit. It's a very small area, so there's really not much to blend, but just to get so those lines disappear. And that's it for the head. Now, using the lighter colour, because she's got a headband on, I very carefully go around underneath the headband because I want to colour her headband in a different colour. Then using the nib end on, still using the light Calypso Coral, because you'll see some of her strands come across her hair and some go down. So I'm just going to flick with the nib end, but what I'm going to do is I'm bringing the brush across her hair. So in whatever direction her hair is, that's the direction you want to do your flicking motion. You don't want to just colour up and down because it won't give a realistic look and it will be hard to blend. So I'm just doing her hair first, and remember I'm only using the light Calypso Coral and I'm using the nib end. Now be very careful when you go close to her skin because we don't want her to have Calypso Coral skin. So then I'm just going to flick up there. Now up here the hair goes straight down, so I'm just flicking it down, and I'm literally just, I want some colour on all her hair, and on these really fine bits I just let the colour go in between the strands as well. Because we are going to add something on top of this at the end, so then I'm just going to turn. I'm just being careful to stay in the camera view, and I'm just going to flick those up there like that. And this is just how I like to colour the mermaid. And it does turn out very nicely at the end. So then I'm going to take my dark Calypso coral and just still using the nib end, those hairs that go across here, I'm just going to add the dark. Hopefully you can see that, the way that I'm bringing my brush across, and I'm just following those strands. There's only about 5 or 6 strands that come across like that, and you can see that there. And then just on the edges, just blend it out a little bit with the light colour, just so that it's not just a direct line that you've added in the dark colour. So I've just used the nib end because it's such a small area. And I will have to leave her overnight to dry. So that's her hair done. So then we're finished with the Calypso coral. Just pop those back on so they don't dry out. And then what we're going to grab is the Bermuda Bay, and just with the light Bermuda Bay, this is what I'm going to colour her hairband with. But all I do literally is just little dots, because it is such a fine, very fine area. But I find the Calypso coral and the Bermuda Bay go very well together using the blend alcohol markers. And that's all I do for her hair. Now we're going to do her scales with the light Calypso coral, and all I'm doing is dotting, because I'm trying really hard not to let that bleed outside the line. So I'm not going right up to the line, because you will find that it will spread a little bit. And you can see how I'm just dotting, and I will use the brush end to finish off, but I just want to get most of it done, especially the edges. With the fine nib end. So I'm just going to go and do this, and it's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots. So that's why I thought I'd do a video doing this for you first. Now you can, if you feel confident, you can just bring it up that side, but be ever so careful that you don't get too close to that line, because you don't want to accidentally go outside. It's just something that you can't rush. But I absolutely love this image. I use it quite a lot on my cards with different sentiments. So we'll just carefully go across the top because we don't want to go onto her skin. Just dotting. And then we're going to change to the brush end to finish her scales off. Okay, so I'm just going to put that on that. And you can hear that snap when I close them. It's very important to close the blend alcohol markers, otherwise if you don't close them properly the alcohol will dry out. So I'm just using a flick motion and I'm just doing blend on blend, what I call blend on blend. So I'm not going to use the dark colour in Bermuda Bay on the actual body, on the scales, because it's such a small area. So just do flicking motion just on wherever you want to add a bit darker colour. And I find the Bermuda Bay goes wonderful in the underwater scene that I'm going to create for you with this card. So there we go, that's her scales done. Then we're going to grab the ivory colour, Stampin' Up Blends ivory colour for her skin. Now I'm using the nib end and I'm just lightly doing her skin. I just want a really light colour, whereas with her tail it's going to be darker. So you don't want to be going over and over her arm or her body where the skin is revealed, because you don't want a really dark colour. So once you've done, just do the edges first, I find easier, and then just flick down just until her body is completely coloured in this top section. I try not to go over it twice, so I find that gives her a really nice colour. Now with her tail we're going to do the same, but we're going to go over it a couple of times. So because it's curved, we want the blend, we want to use our strokes, so we want to come up on an angle. So just, I like to do a bit of a flick in the very pointy part of her tail, and then just come up. Now where these lines, the artist has put these lines in, you wouldn't want to go straight up and down, you want to do like a curve motion. So then I want to just come up on this bottom part, trying not to cover it so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to do like a bit of a curve around her tail, and just flick up. But when you flick up, now you just want to do that curve motion. Now ever so carefully around her scales at the bottom and just flick down. Then we're just going to do the other side. So around there, just a very light flick in that point, because if you put the blend marker completely down in that point of her tail at the bottom, you will definitely go outside the lines. So it's a ever so light touch when you're colouring that. Now I'm just going to go, following the curves, and I'm just using the bullet end of the marker. Then we're going to just finish off the tail, first coat, and see how I'm just following the curve of the tail around. Just be careful in that pointed end down here, just be really careful on the tail. So then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a little bit of using the brush end only on the tail. See, I've kept the body nice and light up here, and now I'm adding another bit of a coating of the ivory on the tail, so it's just a little bit darker. And just try and do those curves. Just follow the artist's lines. And what we're doing is we're just making the tail a bit darker. I think you can tell that on this side it's a lot darker than on this side. So we just need to do this side. And then we're just going to add a very glossy finish, which is why the mermaid needs to be left overnight. And this sort of colouring would work if you've got Copics or anything, an alcohol marker like that. Still the same rules really. Now I'm just going to go ever so carefully in the curve motion. And I'm not going to do too much more to that. Now what I'm going to do is the finishing touch, is why it needs to, I'll just zoom out a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to put some crystal effects. So you need to use a fine brush, and make sure your brush is nice and clean and the fibres aren't stuck together. And I'm just dipping that in very liberally into the crystal effects. And I'm going to add this to her hair. Now what I'm going to do is quite a thick coating without so even I'm letting that crystal effects float over her hair, because I want quite a thick coating of it. Then to start with her hair, just put a coating, and you can see that I'm following the lines once again. I'm bringing it over those darker coloured areas that I did with the darker Calypso coral, but I just want to add a little bit on the light. And you can put this on her scales if you want to, but I really want to accentuate her hair as my focus point, so I want it to be very thick onto her hair area. So I'm just going to get a bit more. Now on these bits that flick across her hair, I'm actually going to put a really thick coating of the crystal effects across there. And this is why it has to dry overnight. But it's well worth it. And then in the next video we'll do I'll show you how I mask and sponge the undersea scene. There are a few tips and techniques to doing that as well, but just want to just a little bit left on the paintbrush, so I'm just filling in those lighter areas because I want those flicked areas to be really thick. So I'll just show you. If you can see, hopefully you can see that. But the flicked areas are a lot more pronounced and thick. So I don't normally put any on the scales. I do put it on the tail, but I don't do it as thick as I've done the hair. And all I'm doing is doing that curve motion to follow my strokes around just following how I use the blends alcohol markers. Doesn't matter if you get some on the scales, or you might like to do the scales as well. And it's really just up to you how thick you want it to be. So it's safe for me to put my fingers on the scales because I haven't got any of the crystal effects on there. But if you haven't got the crystal effects, you can use any glossy, most probably glossy accents would work as well. But I prefer to use the crystal effects. I seem to be able to control it a lot easier than any other medium that I've tried. Now I'm just flicking just like I did with the blends alcohol markers. I'm just flicking. Now what you could do on the lines where the artist has put the lines, you could make it a little bit thicker there if you wanted to. So just remember, how you leave it is how it's going to dry. So you want it to be nice and smooth. So you need to start off with a really clean paintbrush, and all you have to do when you're finished with this paintbrush is I'll just be washing it out with soapy warm water. So we're going to leave her and let her dry overnight, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to do the underwater scene and we'll apply her to the card. So until then, happy crafting and thank you for joining me today.